Welcome to Bits About Books, the home for conversations with authors of breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. Founders, entrepreneurs, and individual professionals, we all need to keep track of ideas that are helping create our today and tomorrow. Bits About Books will strive to find those books and speak to their authors, go behind the scenes and understand what inspired the authors to write the books that they did and how they went about doing so. Through our conversations, we hope to gain insights that will help us to get the most out of our efforts. I'm your host Shubhanjan Sarkar, founder of PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform where our mission is to make buying easy. Welcome to Bits About Books. Thank you for your time and for joining us in this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give you a shout out to each of you in our following episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Today we have with us George Brontén, founder of Membrane and author of the book Stop Killing Deals: How to Avoid Deadly Assumptions and Achieve Sales Excellence.
Well, I'm not sure I'm saying that there's a new way of sales, because I think there's a lot of talk about how new everything is, but quite frankly, I don't think it's that new at all. I think, yes, when it comes to the internet, of course, that changed a lot. Information is now easy to come by, which it wasn't previously. So I won't argue against that. But if you look at the psychology of sales, I would argue that not much has changed, really. Okay, we're more stressed maybe, but people are still people, and our brains are still wired as they have been for tens of thousands of years. So a lot of the things I write about in the book is really to stop making these assumptions and actually start thinking about how we should be selling. And a lot of the how we should be selling is the same.
George Brontén is a lifelong entrepreneur with 20 years of experience in software space and a passion for sales and marketing. With the life motto, don't settle for mainstream, George is always looking for new ways to achieve improved business results using innovative software, skills, and processes. He shares his thoughts on the award-winning blog, Art and Science of Complex Sales. Since 2012, George and his team at membrane.com have collaborated with thought leaders and studied research to identify the success factors behind successful sales organizations. The result of their hard work is a software as a service that makes it easier for companies to capture, learn, and execute the behaviors needed to achieve sales excellence. Now, on to this strategic episode with George Brontén. George, welcome to Bits About Books. I'm delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Before we get in, George, why one more sales book?
Yeah, that's the question one could really ask, isn't it? I didn't really set out to write a book, actually. I started this company called Membrane, which is really the sort of the brainchild of my work for the last decade or so. And I was explaining to people, in the blog and in calls why I did this. And finally, I just thought, okay, this should really be a book to condense all these different blog posts into more of a structured format. So it came about almost as an afterthought.
So possibly before we even come to the structure of the book and how it came about, we should talk a bit about Membrane and why sort of it led to the book, right? So there is a backstory here I sense. So yeah. Let's get to that.
Yeah. Well, the backstory is that I was building another company before I started Membrane, and I really was not very successful in building a sales team. So I hired and fired, and I hired and I fired, and I did a lot of hiring and firing, basically, until I had to give it a proper think, because I thought I was doing everything right. I was using very expensive recruiters. I was hiring people who had been successful in sales in the past. But eventually I came to the conclusion that I had been doing a lot of faulty assumptions. I was assuming that salespeople are somehow born, and that salespeople who had been successful in some other company would also be successful in my company. I realized that I was also assuming that salespeople had some kind of, I don't know, built-in heat-seeking missile to achieve the targets I set up for them, and that they were naturally disciplined and competitive, and I just had this a lot of these faulty assumptions about selling and how to succeed in selling, and also I realized that I didn't really understand how different selling can be depending on what it is you sell and to whom. And in that company at the time, we were doing a big major shift from a more transactional sale to a very complex, high ticket, high risk sales environment. And my sort of image of how a salesperson should be was just wrong. It was simply wrong in that new type of sales environment. I also had an idea that the tools salespeople use are helpful and were built to help salespeople. And I realized that wasn't the case, really. They were just built on this very assumption that salespeople should know what to do and should just log what they've done. And that's how Membrane was born. I wanted to build a technology that actually guides, teaches, coaches salespeople into better sales professionals, as well as their managers. Like, how can managers get better in actually executing a strategy, not just winging it and and like doing whatever they did as a salesperson, but actually having a well thought through sales strategy that is converted into a process that can be taught, that can be learned, and can be executed more easily than like having to learn the hard way. So that's a long story about how Membrane was founded.
Interesting. I just dig a little more on this, because I think finally when we talk about the book, you'll be able to connect it back to these thoughts. You obviously are talking of CRM when you talk of tools in this context. And
yes.
And obviously, since you started Membrane, we have seen other kinds of tools coming up which talk about coaching, right? So just to take that piece that you spoke about. But what was fundamentally wrong with CRMs? I mean, yes, the assumption was they should know how to use it. That was a learning of technology challenge. So to
well,
say,
not really. No, I wouldn't say that it was an assumption that they would know how to use the tool. The assumption was they should know how to sell. And the tool was just there to log what they have done, so that we can pull a report to see if they've done enough. Like, have you done enough meetings, enough phone calls? But there were really no, and still is no, deep dive in the CRM on how to actually sell. So it's the codification, so to speak, of how you sell is what I wanted to solve, because I don't think CRMs have solved that. And since this was like 9 years ago, like you say, a lot of stuff has happened in this tech space. And but I still think what we are trying to accomplish is really taking a quite holistic approach to how do we sell, not just how do we coach. Because when you say that, what comes to mind then to me are coaching applications, which are usually phone call recording software that you can replay what a conversation was all about, which is very relevant, very interesting perhaps, but that's just one piece of the puzzle.
True.
And it has to connect all the way back to the strategy and all the way back to what your customer wants to achieve. So that is really where I think there's a big gap between sort of strategy, if companies have one. I mean, another problem that I think we discussed on our last call is that sometimes there is no strategy even.
True.
But if there is a sales strategy, then how do we actually make that strategy come to life? And this is where we usually and oftentimes salespeople are hired because we hope that they know how to do that.
Yeah, totally.
What Membrane is designed to do is really to put that into a system so that we can really understand these best practices and make everyone on the sales team sort of do it the right way.
Let's get to the book. What what did you figure that you thought that, okay, this is enough to codify and put into a structured narrative so that people can benefit from it?
Yeah, so I wanted to tell the story basically the way I shared it with you now, but maybe in a bit more detail, to how I came to the conclusion that we need to look at selling in a different way. And I wanted to also kind of divide the book into two pieces. First off, sort of what is the problem as I see it, and I go into all these assumptions that I believe are really causing us to manage sales in a less than ultimate way. And the second part of the book is sort of my idea on how to solve it. So if we can now rectify our assumptions, then what? What should we then be doing instead of how we're doing it today? So it's kind of a two-part piece. Another thing that I realized is I wanted to explain a lot of the sort of, I like the psychology of sales.
Right.
So I've written a lot about cognitive biases and things like this on my blog. But when I started to put all that in the book, I felt like, oh my God, this is going to be a very thick book. And people don't have time to read thick books. So actually, I decided to pull all those details out and instead refer to them as downloadable white paper /PDFs on a book website.
Right.
So I tried to really, and this was advice also I received from a lot of other authors. I interviewed maybe a couple of dozen of authors before writing the book to understand. I mean, this is my first book, so I didn't really know much at all of how to put a book together. And these were all sales or marketing authors. And it was funny. I remember one guy particularly, can't remember his name right now, but he's a sales trainer, and he wrote a book 20 years ago or so. And he shared how he went out training people, and then the second part of his training was particularly enjoyed by the people who took it, and they said, "Wow, this is really exciting. This is interesting. You should write a book about this." And he's like, "Well, I wrote a book about this," and the people said, "Well, no, I didn't read about that in the book." And then it came back a few times, and then he realized that was in the second part of the book. Nobody read the second part of the book. So I remember his advice was, if you want to write a book, cut it into half of the size, because they will never read the second part anyway. I thought that's fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I know. I mean, especially you talk about the neuroscience of buying, and we'll get there. Obviously, there is a lot of psychology involved in selling. Let's get to the structure. You had to establish the fact that you are talking of a new way of doing sales, right? So how much of this book was already written as blogs?
Quite a lot. Yeah, I think quite a lot of it was written as blogs previously. But of course, one blog, 800 words times a few hundred scattered.
Right.
So there was no real structure. So the challenge was really putting a structure in place, like the outline. What do I really want to convey? And well, I'm not sure I'm saying that there's a new way of sales, because I think there is a lot of talk about how new everything is. But quite frankly, I don't think it's that new at all. I think, yes, when it comes to the internet, of course, that changed a lot. I mean, information is now easy to come by, which it wasn't previously. So I won't argue against that.
Right.
But if you look at the psychology of sales, I would argue that not much has changed, really. Okay, we're more stressed, maybe, but people are still people, and our brains are still wired as they have been for tens of thousands of years. So a lot of the things I write about in the book is really to stop making these assumptions and actually start thinking about how we should be selling. And a lot of the how we should be selling is the same. If you go back 40, 50 years and ask someone who was really good at this back then, I would say that 90+% of what they recommended was is probably still true to this day. So a lot of it is really, I would say, old school advice. And then I do talk a lot, maybe a bit negatively about technology than one would expect from a technology guy, a software guy. But that's because I think technology is used in the wrong way. It's like with training and exercise. We want to buy an abs wheel from TV shop and we're gonna get 6 packs. It's not the way it works. Yeah. And it's the same in selling. Just because you buy an email automation tool doesn't mean that everyone you send an email to will come knocking at your door to buy your products. It's just not that simple. Yeah. So that is what I'm kind of hammering a bit down on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So walk us through the structure that you came up with. Your core was sort of, to what I gathered till now, is that core was to attack the assumptions and then create a structure around how to do it right.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, definitely. I do challenge the assumptions because I think if we have assumptions or beliefs that are faulty, then our conclusions and decisions will be faulty as well.
Right, absolutely.
And that is kind of the first part of the book, is talking about some examples of assumptions that we make, that salespeople are born and that salespeople are disciplined and all these things. Even we might think that buyers are rational, which is of course also not true because they're also human beings. Yeah. So I try to break some of these assumptions down. And then of course the second part is really about, okay, if we now come to this, if we agree, then of course I introduce some new assumptions, and those assumptions are that we have to assume that we can, well, I shouldn't use the word assume really, but I think we need to put the buyer at the center of what we're trying to accomplish. If we're not, selling, it should really just be an outcome of you helping someone that you have within your audience that you've designed your product and service to help out, right? So helping is really, selling is really helping, but with a money exchange.
Right, absolutely.
And based on that, you should then design your strategy around how to help that buyer, how to connect to that buyer, how to then guide that buyer through their decision journey, and then to deliver your products and services successfully. And I talk about a framework on how to do that in a proper way, basically.
Right. So I'll go back to the beginning of this question. I still want to understand. How did you go about structuring it? That, okay, I'll start with this is how my first part will be. This is what my second part will be. And who were you talking to validating this? What were you doing at that time, actually?
Yeah, so since I came to this conclusion maybe 10 years ago or more, that I was making all these faulty assumptions in my previous company. Back then, I studied a lot. I read hundreds of books on selling and human behavior and all that good stuff. So a lot of that research, of course, was in the back of my head and trying to sort of digest what from all these books was really interesting and most relevant. But to simplify the answer, I would say I needed to come up with what do I want to relay. And how do I want the book to be structured so that it's easy for people to digest? Because the feedback I got from all these interviews that I mentioned, I did interview a lot of people that have written books, sales books specifically, but also other books. And most of them said, like, really have a clear message, what you want to relay, and keep it short. Especially the more senior writers stressed the importance. Don't write 500 words if you could write the same thing in 250 words. Not words, pages, of course. Yeah. But that was I struggled with that a bit because it felt kind of unprofessional in a way to write a thin book. I wanted to write a serious or professional book, right? And that ought to be at least 400 pages. But so that was something that was kind of an insight throughout this process, that keep it shorter, extract some of the deeper sort of psychology-based content out of the book and put it on the side for those who want to access it, and divide the book into two parts. Like first, explain what I think is wrong with the world of sales, and secondly, explain my idea of a framework to fix it.
Okay, so let's get into the content. Let's start with the first part. How did you go about doing it, and what, according to you, is wrong with the world of sales? And how did you structure the content for that, for people to actually get the sense of what you are trying to say?
Yeah. So I went down, I wanted to have three. Three is always a good number. So I looked at what are the three main or the biggest assumptions that were standing in my way that caused me to make all the mistakes. And those were the number one is the one that we believe that salespeople are somehow born. And if you just happen to recruit the right one, everything will magically solve itself. The second one is this that I mentioned about discipline, which connects to the first one, of course. And the third one was about technology, that technology has never been really designed to help salespeople become better salespeople. So those were the three main sort of assumptions that I wanted to dig down into. And I also have one of the books that I read that I really liked is the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. It's a classic book, and I thought that was a big learning experience for me, because in medicine and in surgeons that they were able to reduce the number of deaths by 47% by introducing checklist was a big eye opener for me. And sort of really strengthened my conviction that we cannot assume that salespeople should always know what to do, with whom, when, and why, and how to communicate. It's a very complicated profession if you're in complex B2B sales, actually.
Right.
Because in surgery, you have a patient and they're lying still, they're sedated, they're lying on a table, you operate on them for an hour or two. I mean, that's extremely complex, of course. But I'm just saying that in selling, you might have 8 people involved, and during 6 to 9 months, and they all have their own agendas and they're running around, and you're trying to figure out how to achieve a consensus. So in a sense, complex selling in B2B is even more complex. And you really need to have a structured approach on how to do this and how to sell. So I thought that was I wanted to relay that in the book, that story. I thought that had a lot of relevance to convey also to salespeople who I think one of the reasons salespeople love to be salespeople and why selling is an interesting and nice profession is that there is a lot of autonomy in selling. Depends on where you are and what you sell, of course, but I think that's something that attracts people to the profession, that you can be very creative. There is a lot of autonomy if you do your job well. But that said, it doesn't mean that you don't need structure. However, a lot of salespeople can feel when you introduce the word process to them that it's going to remove their autonomy. So I wanted to share the story of the surgeons for that reason as well. It's not about removing your autonomy. It's just about making sure you don't make any mistakes. It's making sure you are disciplined. And we are not disciplined as human beings. By just our nature is not very disciplined. So I thought that was a very good message to relay also.
Sure.
And also buyers is the next thing I wanted to sort of mention, that we, in a lot of sales books, we talk, you read about messaging, how you should communicate, which questions to ask, etc. And that's all super important. But I think we need to realize that a lot of buyers, or all buyers, I would say, are humans. And humans make decisions on emotions. And they justify those decisions using logic and rationale. But we sometimes believe that buyers are very rational and they're logical creatures, but they're just as irrational as everyone else.
Right.
But some may have a very structured approach to buying and a structured approach to making a decision. Others have no structure at all, which is, again, another level of complexity for sellers to understand, who am I dealing with here? How will they make their decision? And not just sort of just do the same thing over and over again and hoping that it works. So understanding your buyers was a big thing I also wanted to convey. Don't look at buyers as creatures that will do exactly behave like robots and believe that your sort of methodology that you learned or read in a book is going to work the same way on all the people. Buyers are different.
It's time for a short break. George was explaining how humans are not fundamentally disciplined and how Checklist, the book by Atul Gawande, inspired him to think of a system that will make it easy to follow a process for salespeople. I asked George if he can narrate some real stories that back up his assertion that logic does not drive business decisions and that sales folks need to be aware that all ideas and training and techniques will not work the same way with every buyer. They're not rational either. Stay with us.
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity, which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
Welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for Bits About Books and founder of Pitchling, the buyer-seller engagement platform. As we went into the break, I asked George if he can narrate some real stories that back up his assertion that logic does not drive business decisions. Let's find out. Right. So in a chapter 4, you tackle this actually. So would you be able to share some story that you narrate which sort of backs up your assertions that logic doesn't drive decisions?
I can't remember what story I used in that chapter specifically, but
okay.
I mean, you can think about any decision you make. If you're buying a new car, for instance, are you going to buy it just based on a table, an Excel spreadsheet someone sends to you? Or are you actually going to go there, sit in the car, test drive it, and feel how it feels and have that acceleration? It's all about emotions in the end. And it's same in B2B, although maybe not as obvious. And also, I think I referenced a study made by a person who was had a brain injury, and he could perform like rational and logical tasks completely like a normal person, but because his emotional side of the brain, if I'm going to simplify it like that, was damaged, he could not take any decisions. So that his life just fell apart. So one could think because he was able to be rational, he would be a very rational decision maker, but the lack of feeling any emotion led to him not being able to make any decisions.
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting study to sort of convey that we are all driven by emotions, and we make decisions based on our emotions. The status quo is what we have created in our lives and in our businesses. And if you come there and want to make a change, want to make an improvement, it sounds obvious that you want to help them improve. But they're gonna stick to their status quo and not want to change normally.
Right.
I talked about, I think, hormones a bit as well, and how we have a disconnect there when in buying and selling. Once you get to the end of a sales cycle, as a salesperson, you might be really pumped to get the deal signed, whereas your buyer is coming into sort of, hang on, this is getting serious.
Right. Right.
I need to take a step back here and really think this through. This is getting risky, and
Right.
how this sort of disconnect can cause sort of physical
Right.
repellent almost,
Right.
and having to be much more empathetic in a situation that and understanding that your buyer right now is thinking differently and they're reacting differently
Right.
than you are.
Yeah, yeah. So you also talk about evaluation based on communication style and cognitive bias.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I think the just communication styles is really important. I think I mentioned DISC, but there are many personality tests like Myers-Briggs and all of these out there that people talk about. And just understanding as well that people make decisions in different ways. Some are very sort of inward thinkers, whereas others are extrovertly just coming up with ideas on the fly. So you have to sort of be able to tackle all these different personality types. Like, this person is like this. I'm the other way around, but I can adapt because I understand how you communicate.
Absolutely.
And I can even then maybe change how I communicate in order for you to better relate to me and understand what I'm trying to convey. So I think that's a classic. And there are some good books on the topic of language, which I think is really important. I think words that change minds is a good one from Shelley Rose Charvet. She has written about meta language. So basically, the way you use words conveys how you think and how you make decision and what motivates you.
Right. Right.
So you can hear when someone is talking, they say things like, "This doesn't feel good," or "This thing didn't make me feel very good," or someone else says, "Oh, this doesn't sound right." So those are two different ways to express emotions. And if you then talk to the person who was being like an auditive person saying this doesn't sound right, and you relate back to them like, how does that make you feel? There could be a dissonance there. Like, what do you mean make me feel? If you instead would have asked, based on what we've talked about, how does this sound to you? They'd say, oh, yeah, I can relate to that. It sounded quite good to me.
Right.
Whereas that feeling might be something that is a different way of communicating that person doesn't use. So I think that is really, really interesting to study. Like, how do people communicate, and what does that tell you about them? Because it can tell you a lot of things.
So George, let's move to your assertion about technology. Why people think that technology can change things, the assumption that technology can solve the problem, and why you think that is not the right mindset to look at technology with.
Yeah, so first, I think my main message is really that the technology we use, we assume that it was designed to help salespeople, whereas it wasn't really. So that was the first sort of message. The CRMs, we all use CRMs. Everyone is using some kind of CRM. But really, not much innovation has happened from my perspective in that space. There's still sort of a repository of data, mainly.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest innovation was probably when Salesforce took CRM from on-site installations to the cloud. That was a big innovation. Since then, not so sure. But of course, there's been a lot of other technologies that pop up, each solving one particular problem. And this is what I refer to as point pollution, or the Frankenstack, that we add now on top of the CRM because it's not really helping us, but it's important to have all the data. We add things to help us prospect. We add things to help us do better pipeline management and better account planning and better coaching and better et cetera, et cetera. But I think the what's lacking there is this holistic approach to what is it really we are trying to improve. And from my perspective, we should be trying to improve the behaviors of the salespeople and the sales managers, which is intended to help the client. But instead, we buy these tools as shortcuts to not having to work.
I think there has been a lot of talk about whether it's salespeople who are lazy or it's just manifestation of human beings' laziness as such, which is more visible in the sales profession.
But I think it's a lot of different things combined, because we normally there is no real academic program to become a professional salesperson.
Correct.
So that's the first issue right there. Basically, salespeople jump into the profession because it's a profession where you can make money, and you can have this autonomy, and you can engage with a lot of customers. So there are a lot of good stuff and fun things with selling. But there might be, when entering the profession, you might not have had the training that you ought to have had to be successful. Right. Which is why there are so many sales training programs out there that sort of from individual companies or even individuals that have this knowledge and want to relay it to salespeople. So I think it's a lack of skills and knowledge to one part. And then when it comes to management, I think that's a big piece here, because sometimes, what happens is the salesperson becomes successful in the company, and the leadership of the company, which might be technical people or finance people, but they might not really understand selling, they then promote this individual into a sales manager. And again, a person in a role that might not have the skills needed to be a manager, to coach, to follow up, hold people accountable, because and I write about this in the book. Well, just as you were a salesman doesn't mean you become a good sales manager. So I think that's the second problem. And laziness, I do think laziness can be described in different ways. I think laziness can be a very good trait, because we, as humans, we don't want to do work that is meaningless.
Absolutely.
But if we can automate things, if we can have machines do things for us, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
However, if we, like has been happening in the sales profession, if we automate emails and just send out emails thoughtlessly to tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of potential clients, that is not smart, right? That could really destroy your prospecting base if done without thought. So I think there's a laziness can be a good thing, but laziness can also lead to very dangerous behaviors, such as spamming people and making people hate salespeople.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, this will lend to a completely different discussion. I think when you started talking about CRM and it being the data repository, I think it was built for sales management and not to help the sales guys. It was more to keep track of what you are doing, as you said earlier, than ensuring that you are doing the right thing or you know what to do next and so on. Let's move on from there. Let's talk about the solution that you prescribe in the book.
Right. Well, the solution is really about creating your way of selling. We talked about it early, like you have to sort of, one thing that I did early on that sort of a driver for creating Membrane was, and I referred to this in the book as stop the bleeding, which is back to the medical metaphor or analogy. I had an issue where my salespeople did not talk to technical people because they felt it was uncomfortable, they didn't know how to talk to them, etc. So that was sort of a big open wound that I had to fix. And it lent itself well to systematizing it. So I could put it into a system to make sure that on every deal, I want to know that you have talked to the salespeople using a story that they can relate to. That sort of tripled our win rates alone, just one thing. So I start off actually with recommending that stop the bleeding, fix the simple mistakes that your sales team might be doing first. Because a mistake that I see a lot of companies doing, and you've probably read a lot as have about sales enablement, has been a big hype over the last couple of years. And I believe that some have made it a bit more complicated than it ought to be. Maybe also because the people that are talking about this are talking about it from a very enterprise perspective, and sort of make it sound more complicated than it has to be. But if you start off with the simple things and build from there, I think you have a better chance of succeeding. And when you do that, think of it as a framework, like we talked about earlier: customer, strategy, process, coaching, etc. That's sort of my idea. Like, stop the bleeding, and then start creating these frameworks and build it slowly over time to become the way that you can compete by the way you're selling, basically.
Interesting. So you just mentioned about this telling the right story to the buyer, which enabled your team to treble their win rates. Tell us a bit more about that. How did that happen, and what is it that they're doing? Yeah,
that was funny. It was a while back now. We were selling IT automation software, and I trained the salespeople well on how to convey the business value to the leaders of these companies. So basically, we went to the leaders. Normally, that's what's the first part of the sales process. And we convinced them that they could deliver IT services in a new way that could tenfold actually their profitability in their companies. And of course, all the owners and the leaders of these companies were very excited. They're like, wow, this is amazing. Tell us how to do it. And my training of the salespeople, my lack of sales process led the salespeople to go from this hallelujah meeting to basically trying to close it with a quote, a proposal. But what ended up happening was that the technical people within those companies got really afraid, because they now, what they heard was, oh my God, management is going to buy IT automation and I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah.
So they did everything they could to stop the deal from happening. So I had to coach the salespeople to say, you have to engage the technical people early on, and you need to explain to them what the value is in their lives. And one of the stories we used was pizza on Thursdays, because back then Microsoft released their patches on Thursdays once a month, and these poor technicians had to stay up late and patch all their customer servers to make sure they were secure. And of course, they would rather be at a game or with their family or friends than sit up all night eating a pizza, patching these servers. So that was sort of the story I coached them and we came up with to sort of talk to the tech people. Wouldn't you rather do this than this boring work? And they said, yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, that's what automation can give you. You can free up all this time so that you can do something more fun with the time. Management doesn't want to fire you. They just want to use the brain in a better way, which is going to be good for you. It's going to be good for the customer and for everyone involved. And that way they were like, oh, okay, that sounds good. I want to be a part of that. So you just had to talk to them in a way that they, like you said earlier, see the value of what it is, of the change that the management wanted to do. So we had about, I think, 10% win rate and went over 30% with that small change.
Interesting. So to wrap this up, what will be the takeaway? I see the questions typically is, what is the one takeaway you want readers to take out from this book? I think that's a very unfair question to ask. I would not say that. I would say, what is the takeaway that you think readers should have from this book?
I think you readers, and I actually wrote the book mostly to leaders of companies and leaders of sales teams, more so than to salespeople themselves. But I want leaders and the readers of the book to think about how we sell, or can we make how we sell into a competitive advantage? Because if everyone out there, or most of the people and companies out there, are making these assumptions and selling in a sort of shortcut type of way, and if we did it differently, we might be able to be much more successful. So making how you sell into your competitive advantage is really what I want readers to think about.
Bits About Books is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink makes buying easy by enabling high-quality engagement between buyers and sellers through its presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create customized sales narratives using sales collaterals and personal videos, and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversations. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 99021 631 32.
Okay, George, this was a great chat. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure people who are reading your book will find a lot of value listening to this.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes with great conversations on breakthrough books with Melissa Madian and her book Enabler, I Hardly Know Her, an entertaining take on sales enablement. Brad Jevons and his book Agile Sales, Delivering Customer Journeys of Value and Delight. And Ramli John on his brand new book Product-Led Onboarding, How to Turn Users into Lifelong Customers. Also look out for our Listener's Choice episodes featuring Diane Helbig, Stu Heineck, and Thomas Williams.
When we are in this always closing sales mindset, we think everybody we meet is a potential customer. We've decided, or we have been told, that if we are just convincing enough, if we are eloquent enough, the other person is going to want to buy from us. So first of all, that's not true. People buy because they need something or they want something and they trust the person who's selling it. And the way they trust that person is they believe the person cares about them more than the person cares about making a sale. So the only way we can do that is to be genuinely curious about the person we're talking to. That's number one. Number two, we have this weird belief that any business is good business, that we just have to generate revenue. And the truth is that that's garbage.
Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for being with us today on Bits About Books, where we talk to authors about breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. We hope this conversation helped inform and motivate as we all navigate a rapidly changing business environment. For us, these are enlightening conversations enriched with knowledge and expertise. We encourage you to go out and buy the book to learn firsthand and implement some of the great ideas we discussed today. We hope to have you with us again in the next exciting episode of Bits About Books. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast from, and give us a rating while you are at it.
This Bizcast original podcast is produced for PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where the mission is to make buying easy. Hosted by Subhanjan Sarkar and produced by Rajiv Aditya. See you next time and have a wonderful day.